So I think now we can move on to some questions for speakers. I think the first one we had was, have you looked into data recording standards and training, and if not, will you be doing this? I think as I can answer that part on behalf of the Data Quality Hub, that part of our framework sets out the need to look at data quality across the whole of the data lifecycle. So that includes right from data collection through to the analysis and use of the data. So in the products that we develop, we'll be thinking about how to help with data quality issues right along that path. So that will include when the data comes in and when it's recorded. There's also another initiative that was set up at the same time as the Government Data Quality Hub, which is currently within the Government Digital Service, and that's called the Data Standards Authority. And I thought, Alison, would you be able to give a little bit of insight into their work, please?
James, good idea. I was going to put my hand up on that one, just to shout out to the Data Standards Authority under Sue Bateman. If you're on the call, then well done, Sue, for a lot of good work in this space. The DSA is attempting to do what no one's achieved before, really, which is to create that sense of standards-based approach to a whole range of different data standards, including open data, metadata, API approaches, CSV, and there's no limit to potentially what can be included in the data standards framework, because I think we are already seeing that people are calling out for wanting to take a consistent approach, and in many cases it's a case of learning from what already exists and making the most of what people have learned as we go along. So the Data Standards Authority is an example of what we're doing in that standards space. I mentioned the taxonomy of 5 different areas, and this is very much quite a broad partnership approach, including parts of the Cabinet Office, the ONS, Treasury colleagues, DCMS, the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, all trying to bring together some real progress. So the Data Standards Authority, I think, will continue to make real inroads. It's a cross-cutting group of individuals from various sectors, and very busy trying to put together what should be a consistent approach for standards. And we're publishing things as part of the DSA work, so you can tap in and see what we're publishing at any one time. Thanks, James.
That's great. Thank you, Alison. Yes, we have another question, which was, how can we make sure that data quality assessment is achievable and pragmatic for those with limited resources? I think I'll give that one to Lisa first.
Thought that might come to me. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So in organisations I've been in before, it's been about prioritising the key your key deliverables. So what's the things that you need to deliver to deliver your outcomes of your corporate strategy? So, for example, in the Environment Agency, which is not a data producer like OS is so much, we used to prioritise things like the National Flood Risk Assessment. So we need to make sure that the quality of that was spot on, because it was about saving people's lives. So there were other things, though, that might be lower down the pecking order. So what we did actually was really understand what our priority business outcomes were for our organisation, and then those were the things we really put the spotlight on for the organisation. And it's also about, I think we're thinking about it now, it's also what Nicola says about spreading it. So it's just not one team that's doing it for all. If you can bring that data quality culture in, then actually you might want your experts on your most highest priority data, but actually you need other people who've got that skills and ability to be able to work on it too. So I think you put your focus from your teams who've got that expertise on the stuff that's really critical for delivering your outcomes, but you do need to make sure you've got skills in other teams for the less critical things, I'd say.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa. Nicola, do you have any insights on that from your work with organisations on data governance?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with what Lisa said. And as she was talking, what it made me think of is an approach that I've introduced in nearly every organisation I've worked in for the last few years, is one that I call materiality or criticality. And it's so that you identify the data and you classify it so that you know what is critical, because let's face it, it isn't going to be useful for us to measure and monitor every single piece of data in your organization. Some of it, as Lisa was saying, is much more important and critical to you. So if we classify it, then we know we're focusing on the right things rather than the things that we fancy or that looks easy to go and do. So we'll go and do that one. We know that this is critical to what we're trying to deliver at the moment, and therefore we will put our efforts into that. And I think that's a really good way. And also, perhaps, I always say perhaps 3 levels of criticality, maybe critical, important, and everything else. I never think of a good word for the third. But high, medium, and low is probably the best way of thinking about it. And you might do nothing about low because it's used for context. And, clever people like Alison, when they're doing their statistical analysis, they want that data for context, but it doesn't really matter whether it's perfect or not. But there's going to be some data that's absolutely critical. And that's where we should be putting our effort. And I like this having maybe 3 levels, because you can say, well, this is so critical. This is where we put everything. We do all our proactive monitoring. We make sure everything's defined and documented. And then we might have something in the middle, and then everything else, we'll wait and see if there's a problem with it, and then we'll do our data quality. But yeah, you definitely can't do everything, like Lisa said.
James, can I build on that as well, which is, in any maturity sort of model approach, it's really helpful to recognise that it's not about instantly reaching the top of that maturity across the piece on everything. And the real value these maturity models deliver are an opportunity for organisations to appreciate where they are in these places, to work out the progress they want to make. And in some cases, some of that may take some time. And I think what I find really interesting is when we've run previous matrix in the past for transformation ability or delivery skills, when you look at where you are surprised at just how far you've got to go on that journey. It's an opportunity of sort of looking openly and saying, actually, we've got some things we want to do better, and then find the trajectory to work on. So variable geometry is really important. I think using the framework and any maturity model to help prioritize and focus minds is a really good way. And then you can take account of capacity and resource constraints as well.
Thanks all. It's also worth pointing to 2 sections of the data quality framework that touch on this as well. There's one on data quality action planning, which deals with precisely that issue of how to really zero in on the data quality elements that are really important for the decisions that are made as a result of the data. And there's also a section that explains how maturity models work and gives a example of a data quality version as well. So on to the next question. Oh, this is an interesting one. So how do you intend to talk to non-data people and get those in leadership and senior positions to understand in their terms why this is important to them? So I think, Alison, would you be able to, as a senior leader yourself, would you be able to take this one first, please?
I've worked in a whole number of different professions over the years, including policy, including delivery, and I've often found the way to make real progress is to stop evangelizing some of the terminology. And the way, for instance, to make progress on delivery was never to mention the word PPM, or the way to progress often on digital delivery was to stop throwing the word agile around as if it answered every problem you had. In reality, I think our non-technical or non-data specific colleagues really understand now the value that approaching data in this kind of way is bringing. And a bit of a test I apply as to whether we've made real progress is if a non-digital technical person is setting up a spreadsheet, do they recognize the difference between structured and non-structured data? Are we got a level of general awareness in data across the piece? We've got a lot of work going on with civil service reform, basic understanding that digital and data skills are as important as basic commercial or communications or the ability to communicate. So I think we've broken the back, if I'm honest, of needing to convince people that they should be aware of and seek help. And then I think it's our responsibility to communicate this as openly and as engaging as possible. And I think that's another example where I think, Nicola, you were pointing out the framework kind of gets you into that kind of discussion. So my honest sense, and I've sat around the table of permsecs on a regular basis, and I'm seeing a change. People around those tables understand this, they get this, And I think it's they're crying out for help. And just to give one other example, the policy profession, for instance, have regularly called technical colleagues in and data specialists in to talk and present the work that we're doing. And every opportunity we get, I think we should turn up and tell the stories in their language. That's the important thing.
Thank you,
I'd
Alison.
echo that.
Yeah,
sorry.
I was
James.
about to ask you, Lisa, you must have had to have got this up the agenda in Ordnance Survey to get your data quality culture work off the ground.
I think it's in every organisation you're working. I think that you have to be there. Data storytelling. I think it's definitely, as Alison said, it's about talking to them in the way that they understand. So often I always go into them and talk to them about. I mean, because I've got the war wounds from going in and talking about the data side of things, and that doesn't work. So you go in there and talk about their problems, what are the things that are keeping them up at night, what's the things they worry about, what's the things they want to achieve, and then you can flip it to see how the data can help them. But it's also about data storytelling. So how can you get their imagination ignited about the things, the opportunities, or the scare stories? But you never use the scare stories from your own organisation, because there's plenty in the press. So you always use others to, you can either get them to action for that burning platform. So I think for me, it's just about how you can just make data fun, but I suppose you don't mention it straight up as data.
Yeah, I would echo that, actually. And I always say that you should focus on the outcomes. I agree with everything Alison and Lisa has said. Is, these people aren't interested in the data quality framework. They're interested in what it means for them. What will they get as a result? What will make their life easier? So that so it's talking to them in those terms rather than, I think, like Lisa saying, she got her war wounds. My war wounds are very much for evangelizing and doing everything perfectly and best practice. And I used to get thrown out of meeting rooms. So, people aren't interested in doing it for best practice. There's got to be something in it for them. So you've got to talk to them about it in those terms.
But I mean, 2020 has been a year of data, hasn't it? There's been data on our televisions day in, day out. It's really clear to people that this is a moment where we are presenting and providing data that is supporting policy making and policy outcomes, and that's what people want of us.
I think that's really important perspective as well when we start to work with people on implementing this framework, is to make sure it really connects with people and make the sort of the concepts and principles really translate into the questions people are trying to answer. So and we've seen much better engagement so far when we've tried to do that. So that's something we'll be building on. Now, thanks everybody for that. So there's another question here. So we are looking to embed data skills in all role profiles across the organisation as part of a data literacy programme. But one of the biggest challenges is de-geeking the materials to make it understandable. That's a new term on me, but I think it's pretty obvious what it means. So I think there's a question there. Again, it's kind of connected to what we were talking about earlier, is connecting to non-data people, but perhaps more at a working level as well. Lisa, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, I was thinking about how this relates to the DDAP framework as well. So, the data, digital and technology skills, because obviously there's a lot of work on there on the role profile. So I just wonder whether there's work going on there that might be reinvented some of the wheels, because there's some really good stuff on there that translates the roles you need in an organisation. So yeah, I think if I take a look at that framework if you haven't seen it, and how do you make sure you've got those core skills? So I think sometimes I talk about it as the foundational capabilities that you need as an organisation to deliver your outcomes, and then I link the skills to those, is the way that I tend to do it. So you're building it up always again to those outcomes you're trying to achieve, and how that those skills will help you deliver your outcomes.
And James, just sort of focusing on capabilities for the moment, across the digital data and technology communities, at least in central government, we know that quite a low percentage relate to the data family at the moment. And I think it gives a good indication of where the growth areas will be. So if you are already, or if you are training as a data architect or data engineer, those in particular, I think, are the skills we're going to see grow enormously in terms of demand over the period ahead. But the data family it consists of a whole range of different skills and competencies that we need. So, as Lisa says, the competency framework is a really good place to dig in.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So we have another question. So with regard to data in government, I'd like to see more emphasis on how policy development attempts to embed data standards and data quality at its core. In that way, we're already thinking about how we're going to collate the evidence to tell us whether the policy is actually achieving what it set out to do. How can we start to make that happen? Alison?
I think this is one of those situations where there's a whole series of activities underway which bring more closely together, for instance, the analytical function with the policy function and activity within departments. That's enormously helpful, ensuring that the right questions are being asked in a policy context, which the analysts are able then to engage in making sure we've got the right data to answer questions that policymakers can use. It kind of starts in that sense of what is the absolute use case here and how can we ensure that we're answering them. And I think that that's been my observation, whether it's the example of the Vulnerable People Service or COVID related sort of policy solutions, where we have an incredibly clear use case in question, that seems to drive all sorts of fantastic work across boundaries that is more difficult when you don't have the use case up front. And usually those use cases derive from quite complex policy questions. How are we tackling homelessness? How are we tackling climate change, net zero, the recovery, economic recovery? Those are big policy questions that we as this community can do more, in my view, to work out what are the data sets and the kind of data flows that will answer that question. It goes right to the hub of this data culture question, doesn't it, within the framework of this life cycle model. This isn't data for the sake of data. This is recognizing that data has an essential role to play within your business operation. And if you're a policymaker, understanding the information flows you need becomes that more important. So we can play a role, I think, by trying to identify those use cases with our partners and those within departments. And then we can do more to work across our boundaries, I think, to really share those data flows and make the connections and connect data. So it's a really exciting area, and I think we boil down the use cases to things that are resonating, and this is where, as I mentioned, economic recovery, net zero, aspects of how we're treating further aspects of COVID and the inoculation programs, etc., are big significant programs of work.
So Lisa and Nicola, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think it'll be a really good case study, actually, because I think it's looking at what you're trying to prove with your policies. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because it might be that you do the policy development, but you don't think about actually the successful outcome and what data you need to show whether it's successful or not. So then you have to take it right back to the start. So I think it would probably be a really interesting use case to drill into and share on, you know, how do you make sure the data's embedded in that policy questions. So the policy development, but also the success of a policy and how you bring that back. So yeah, no, maybe that's one for you, James, to have a little look. I think it'd make a good case study.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else to add. I think that was really succinctly put, Lisa. That was just yeah, and I think there is that, you know, tie into it so that policies don't stand alone from the data, that they're intrinsically linked.
Absolutely. I think we have published a selection of case studies from the in the framework, but there's always room for more to articulate how this can really help with decision making. So I think we've got time for one final question. So this is there any linking with the ONS centres of excellence, such as quality improvement, sport economic statistics? So I think at the moment we really are looking to join up with as many organisations and initiatives as possible. Please do get in touch if you're interested in working with us on data quality. I think there's a general question here about how all these initiatives on data can kind of best align to really make a difference for better use of data in government. So, and Alison, do you have a perspective on that?
I think it goes back to one of the earlier points we were making, that none of this is undertaken in isolation. And there is so much going on across government at the moment, which means the dependencies between aspects of quality of statistical production, aspects of further policy development or standard setting, etc., I'm seeing this joined up in a far more cohesive way, not only within organisations but across boundaries as well. We've got data governance operations that are managing to sort of work out the issues we need to tackle individually and collectively. So I'm not seeing the divisions that I have seen in the past, and I think that applies across ONS as much as it does across the rest of the estate.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's probably bring us to the end of our Q&A session.